It is DDO Players, and we are sitting here talking with Tim Simons, one of the designers of the game we recently did a review for. Game is up on Kickstarter now. It is called Bloc by Bloc, the Insurrection Game. So thanks for joining us, Tim.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Let's start out, before we get into the game, let's talk about your game company, Out of Order Games. Can you tell me a little bit about you guys?
Sure. Well, this is our first title that we've put out. And we basically, for various reasons, we decided that Bloc by Bloc, which is a game that has been in development for over 5 years, but it's been really in the past a little over a year that we've been doing really heavy play testing and really revising a lot. We decided that we wanted to self-publish it. And so because of that, we decided we needed to pull together a small publishing company, and then Out of Order Games is what came out of that. And so it's Rocket Lee and myself, and we're really interested in exploring themes that aren't as common in a lot of board games, subversive themes that tackle semi-controversial subjects.
Yeah.
It's been a really exciting ride so far. So we're figuring this out kind of as we go, but it's been awesome, and the amount of support we've received is great. We're based here in Oakland, California.
Okay.
And
go Raiders.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a big Raiders fan, so go
awesome.
Raiders.
I love a good underdog, you know?
Silver and black for life, I'm telling you.
And they're doing a little better, so we'll see what happens this next season. But yeah, so we're here in Oakland, and yeah, we have an awesome, there's an awesome community and scene here that we've been able to really connect with some of the various local gaming stores, and just a lot of cool people who've really helped us figure out like how to position ourselves and have helped us, basically move forward with this project. We're to the point where we're at now, and the Kickstarter's live, and we're doing it. So
you said that this was the first game that you guys have done. Have either you or Rocket, either one, worked in the game industry before, or is this just like something you're just jumping in feet first and going for it?
I'm definitely jumping in feet first. Rocket has a lot more of a background in gaming and has developed some games before. Actually, Rocket studied game development at MIT.
So, oh, wow.
So actually, in some ways, Rocket brought that level of experience that I think really took this to another level. But personally, I am definitely jumping in just, head first into this, and it's been awesome. I mean, I actually, I guess that's sort of a disclaimer. I'm not actually much of a gamer. I've always thought games were amazing. And when I was, younger, I definitely played a good amount of tabletop games and some role-playing games, some advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition.
Right on, yep.
But more recently, I actually haven't had a lot of connection to tabletop gaming. I've always sort of been very interested in it, but just for various reasons haven't done that. But this project has sort of brought me back into that world, and it's really through the project that I've kind of reapproached gaming right now.
So I know I had mentioned we have a review up on the site of the game. You were kind enough to send me a prototype version of it, and I loved the game. It was different than what I was expecting, actually, but we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, I'm very curious.
Why don't you give me as I like to say, the elevator pitch of what Bloc by Bloc is, and then we'll kind of talk more about the design of it.
Sure. Well, Bloc by Bloc is the Insurrection game. It is a semi-cooperative tabletop game for 2 to 4 players. It's pretty deep strategy and has this element of hidden agendas. It's a game of sort of street tactics and area control and area control, and almost like a worker placement game in a city that is randomized each game. So each time you play, it's a totally different city. We have this modular tile set up. And the story of the game is that you are the people of the city from various factions. Each player plays a different faction, and everyone is basically struggling together to overthrow a repressive government. And so the game is about popular uprisings, revolutions, and insurrections. That's the idea behind it.
And just, you did say that it was the game was different every time, and that is my favorite part about it, I think.
Cool.
Is the way you designed the tile placement, that it is no 2 games, because I played, I think, four games. I think I played 4 games.
Awesome.
And literally, like you said, no games of mine were the same, which, that's kind of the problem I have with some games is after you play them many times, you kind of get a strategy built up in your head. It's like, okay, I'm going to do, A, B, and C, and then, D and E are going to happen, and then I'll do F and G. Well, with this, it's like, you can't do that. And so I applaud you guys for making a totally random system like that.
Yeah, it's I think it's one of the strongest parts of the game as well, and it, it's, the idea that we want each time you play the game for there to be sort of a different story of this uprising that emerges from the game, and the way that plays out is so dependent on like the urban geography that is created by this board, and this all comes from sort of an inspiration from watching, various uprisings and social movements around the world and how each one responds differently to the different sort of urban context that it's in. So that was a really important part of it for us, was figuring out how to make this really replayable, and every city is kind of a different city. And we actually did some calculations of how many different cities you can create with this modular board setup, and it's in the billions.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah. As soon as you start adding up those numbers, it really goes up real fast. And and there's also, you probably see this, there's a bit of asymmetrical powers that the various factions have. So so when each time you play, you really are kind of given a slightly different tool set to work with, and then depending on how you're positioned on the board, there isn't really the those first three moves that you always have to make. It really depends on your context and where you're starting, and there are some general strategies to the game, but yeah, I'm really glad to hear that you were able to pick that out right from the beginning as being one of the strong parts of the project. So,
and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but this game, you can draw parallels from what's happening here in, I guess I'll say, the real world. Can you kind of touch on kind of the examples you guys drew from when you were designing this?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, there's so many, honestly. Even like as we speak, there's some examples that I could touch on that really, speak to what this game, what the theme of this game is, but I think it's interesting to point out that, we first started developing this game. Actually, this is before Rocket and I started working together. So I initially came up with this idea with a group of other people in 2010. So, 6 years ago now almost. And at that time, and I should say, none of the core mechanics were particularly fleshed out. It was just the sort of overall theme, the basic idea of this, each game should be in a different city. Some of us were sitting around in Mexico City that summer in 2010, and we kind of came up with the basic outlines of this. And at that time, we were inspired by, I think, you could say 3 different events. One was in Oaxaca City in 2006. There was an uprising against the government there, and it was started by, Oaxaca's in the south of Mexico, and it's a fairly poor state, and it has a long history of the government being extremely corrupt and really brutal. And there was a teacher strike that summer that for protesting for better wages and for better facilities for the classrooms, things like that. And the police were brought in and really cracked down extremely hard on the teachers and evicted a camp that they had set up in the center of the city. And in response to that, everyone from the city said, no, these are our teachers. You can't just mess with them like that. And they basically took over the whole city, drove out the police, and had sort of a liberated city for about 6 months before, I think it was November of that year, when finally basically the military was sent in, like a federal sort of riot police force was sent in to really basically crush the uprising. And that was something that some of us had taken note of, and we knew some people who had been part of that. And so that was an initial piece of inspiration. And then fast forward a couple years later to the end of 2008 in Greece, in Athens, Greece, which is in the center of the city. There's a real tradition of street protests and anti-capitalist politics, things like that. And in a certain neighborhood in that city called Exarchia, the police shot dead a young boy named Alexander Grigoropoulos. And he was a young radical, kind of a punk, was involved in various political scenes there. And in response, kind of the youth of Greece rose up for about a month. And they call it December, like the whole month of December of 2008.
There was ongoing clashes with police, occupations of all the universities, and it was a real show of power from this from young people who felt really disenfranchised by the government there, and that was another extremely important point that we noted. The final one I'd say was that about 1 month later, here in Oakland, the police killed a young black man named Oscar Grant. They shot him in the back, and there's actually a movie made about that called Fruitvale Station. That's a pretty good movie, I recommend. And there was protests and riots here in response to that, and that was right outside our windows in the streets, and that we are in every single day. And so being a part of these things and seeing this stuff unfold is really what sort of created the idea for it would be amazing to try to capture these dynamics in a board game that sort of showed people how these things unfold, and the politics and the tension between the different factions within an uprising. So all of that, I would say, sorry for the long-winded response.
Oh, that's all right.
That's really that's where the original idea came from in 2010. The game sat on the shelf for about 4 years after that, before we really picked it up and really decided to we're going to finally do this. And I think what really pushed it over the edge and made us decide to finally do it was what happened in the meantime, because you have the Arab Spring, which some people call the Arab Spring, in across the Middle East and Egypt. They overthrow the government in Tunisia. They overthrow the government. These are all kind of people demanding that the police should not be so brutal, that the economy should work for them and not work for not work for just a corrupt sort of elite. And then that spreads into the plaza occupations all across Europe. And then it finally comes to the United States as sort of the Occupy movement, is what we call it now, And then after that, you have the Black Lives Matter movement in Ferguson and Baltimore. So if anything, the number of examples that we could look towards to find inspiration and sort of flesh out this theme, it multiplied tenfold between when we first started making this, when the idea first came about for this game, and when we actually started to do the heavy development. So there's a real we're lucky to live in this time where there's this real rich history. We're sort of living through these amazing historic moments. I think we're going to look back on a lot of these, and they're going to be the stuff that that is written about in terms of what changed the world. And so we decided to just go for it and try to do something a little bit different and try to make a game out of all of this.
So touching on that, up on your Kickstarter page, one of the reviews that you have up on there is from Barry Kindle, and he said, quote, "Block by Block could be the centerpiece of a college course on popular movements and anti-authoritarian resistance."
Yes.
So did you set out to kind of make this game like a political lesson, or was it, because I know the theme of it revolves around that, but did you make a conscious decision that it's like, okay, we're going to have like a little lesson in this that people probably won't realize when they're playing unless they sit and think about it? Or was that just kind of an accident?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, okay, on one level, I think we just wanted to make a really fun game that had, a lot of replayability, pretty, like I said, pretty deep strategy. And we wanted to make something that felt a little different. So on one side, we really just were excited about the idea of making a game. But on the other side, I think we did want to be very faithful and respectful of, the very real and contemporary topics that the game touches on. And I think the best way to do that is to sort of treat it as, on some level, there is an educational tool as part of this. It does introduce a lot of ideas. It is, it is honest in a sense in terms of both the complexities and the contradictions that you see emerging in these kinds of social movements around the world,
and it's very subtle, I think, too, because I didn't think about it while I was playing it, and until after I was getting ready to write the review, and I thought, this has a lot of lessons that you can parallel to what's going on now that I didn't think of when I was playing.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear you say that. I mean, we don't want to be didactic.
Right? Oh no,
you over the head with it.
Definitely, it was not. It's not. So if anybody listening thinks that, it is absolutely farthest from the case.
Yeah, I mean, and we also want to have fun with it because it's something, and it's a thing that we've again and again we've run into in terms of talking to people and seeing if they'd be interested in reviewing or even just playing it, is that some people are just their immediate reaction is like,
this feels a little too real for me. I play games to escape reality.
Yeah,
this feels
exactly.
too much like this feels too much like it is reality. And so, and I respect that. I mean, I play games also to escape reality sometimes, but I think with all of that said, like we want to make something that's really fun, but it also, it's not afraid to go to a place that maybe there is some very real world connections here to what's going on, and hopefully people leave the game. It sort of leaves the wheels in their brain spinning a little bit and thinking a little bit about some of these things that we're going to continue to see on the news. This stuff isn't going away anytime soon. Right now there's France is it's not, the mainstream media isn't really covering it, but if you look closely at what's going on in France, there's all kinds of protests and riots and occupations, and it's all about this labor law that they're implementing and sort of the really repressive martial law that has been imposed on France ever since the terrorist attacks that happened last year. And so you have this stuff is continuing, and so we might as well. I think board gaming is an amazing, gaming in general, but I think tabletop gaming in particular, because of the social element of it. It's an amazing medium to talk about things that are going on in our world, or just talk about ideas. And I think, we're not afraid to do that with books. We're not afraid to do that with movies. We're not afraid to do that with comic books even. But there's something about board gaming that in some ways, I think it's caught people's attention in both a good way and a not so good way. But I think, we're totally embracing that. We want to run with it. And I think, people will be pleasantly surprised when they play it. So it's also just a fun game. So, did
you find that you had a lot of obstacles and objections to the game as you were making it? Because this is kind of, I guess it could be considered a very controversial game in a way. I don't think after playing it that it should be, but I know just looking at the subject matter, I'm sure it's going to be branded that way. So what were some of the hurdles you guys had to jump through as you were making this because of the subject matter?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is that people have been so cool about this, and both in terms of local game stores here and play testers here. We've had so much support, and I can't tell you how humbling it has been to have, especially in the early stages of this project when we were bringing out these games, which still had so many bugs, and something would happen, the game would break, and people were such good sports about it. And they also, 95% of people that we've been in contact with, either in person here in the Bay Area or, online and through the broader sort of national, gaming community, have been so excited about it, because I think they see it as a project that is, pushing boundaries and that there's a lot of energy and a lot of ideas behind it. So that, first and foremost, I would say that it's been awesome. And meeting people through this has been just great. And I can't thank everyone enough who's been a part of this, and who has supported us through this. But with that said, there were a number of reviewers who were very respectful and actually took the time to write really pretty awesome responses to us about why they particularly felt like they couldn't write about this, and they didn't want to put a review on their blog or on their website about it. And usually it was along the same lines of what we were kind of just talking about, which is that people felt like it was just a little bit too real.
Right.
And we even had someone say once, and I think this is it brings up some interesting questions. They said, if you took the same mechanics and basically even the same artwork mostly, but you just made the game take place in sort of a dystopian future, sort of like the Hunger Games, then suddenly this game would be so much more palatable to everyone out there, if you just abstract it slightly from the real world. Because
it wouldn't be real life then. It would, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was tempting for us, because I think there is a way that we could maybe, avoid a little bit of this quote unquote controversy with that. But I think in the end we decided that's not, I'd love to make that game. Hopefully, maybe that'll be the sequel or something,
Hey, there you go.
but for this game, I think, it's partially just to be respectful of where the inspiration came from, and just, that's what the game is about. It's about what's going on right now, and I don't think as gamers or as game designers we should be afraid of that. There's other specific things in there that have been slightly controversial, like the fact that you can loot in the game. You can loot commercial centers, and that's one of the ways that you, as a faction in this urban insurrection, that's one of the ways you gather resources for yourself. Everything from materials to build barricades, to medic kits, to fireworks that drive off police, to Molotovs. That's another thing that's been slightly controversial. But what were you going to say?
I don't understand why that was controversial, because to me, that mechanic reminded me a lot of what you do in Dead of Winter.
Exactly, I think that makes a lot of sense.
So, yeah, I don't understand why that would be a controversial thing, because I guess it harkens back to this is just too real. And I apparently just blocked out when I was playing it. I blocked out the fact that this was real life until after I got done playing it, I guess. So maybe I would have thought that was controversial at the time if I would have thought that. But
and again, I think we put that in there knowing full well that we're not we know that there's a lot of people out there who are not going to be fans of looting. But this is what happens when you have sort of a breakdown of law and order, and you have people taking to the streets, and especially in a society where where the rich have so much and everyone else is kind of really screwed over. Whenever you have an uprising, there's always an inevitable backlash against that. And people sort of take from the places where they see there being a lot of wealth, and they take that back for themselves. And we thought that it was important to include that in the game as one of the ways that you could gain advantages and one strategy you can take. But it also has its consequences, because every time you loot a location, you can't get around this. There's a chance the police are going to show up. And in the game, there's the reaction roll mechanic that really comes to play a lot with the looting in the game. And so it's a very risky tactic, in the game. If you loot close to where you have your centers of power, you actually might draw the police into that area, and it's not something you want to do. And then on top of that, we also wanted to make it so that when you liberate parts of the city, you can no longer loot those parts of the city. The areas that are liberated are not places that you would ever loot. You would never go, once there's a place that is on your side, you would never go and take things, smash up that store and take things from it. And so the act of liberation in the game is actually a non-violent act. It's not, it just requires people coming together, and the mechanic is very much about just gathering sort of a critical mass in a certain part of the city, and when you gather a critical mass there, that then liberates that part of the city. And so we wanted to sort of balance out that there's different ways that these things unfold, but we're not going to hide from the elements of them that bring up these sort of uncomfortable questions. And in some ways, I think that makes for a better game. It adds to that tension, and so so we stand by those kinds of decisions.
And on the same lines of design choices, this is a semi-cooperative game. You could have gone many different ways with this. What was the design choice to do the semi-cooperative route?
So yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, when we first started stitching together the outlines of this game back in 2010, I wasn't personally familiar with cooperative games. I mean, I know that there's been various cooperative games that have, cycled through the gaming community for quite a while, but it's really been in the past, 5-6 years that it's become a thing that's become, super popular, to the point where some of the most popular games right now are cooperative games. So that wasn't actually something I was really aware of, and it was always a problem with how we were envisioning the game, because we didn't want any player to play the role of the government or of the police. That would be another way you could create a game about insurrection, and I actually think that would be a really interesting way. And actually, there's an Italian game that I don't think is available in the United States, and it's called Riot board game, I'm pretty sure. And that's one which is a little different, where you can actually play either side. You can play the police or the protesters. But we didn't want to do that. We wanted everyone in the game to be, experiencing sort of what it feels like to be a part of an uprising. So that brought us with it brought us to an interesting question, because we initially approached this as like, how we make it a competitive game. But then we were thinking, well, we don't want the different people of the city to be competing against each other. That's kind of a very cynical view of what could happen in these moments. The ideal thing is cooperation. It's people finding common ground. It's people uniting against, kind of forces that are repressing them, no matter what background they come from. So in the game you have the workers, the students, the prisoners, and the neighbors. These are the four factions of the city that sort of are cooperating to overthrow the government.
So when I started to stumble across various cooperative games, like a lot of the games by Matt Leacock, Pandemic, Forbidden, Desert, games like that, it started to open up this idea of like, what if we turn this into a cooperative game? And what if the game itself was the state, and that, the state and the police, and that was sort of the solution that we needed. But then that brought us to one even like farther. It brought us to another question, which was like an additional problem that we had to solve, which was that, first of all, we don't want this to be too much of like a kumbaya. Everyone just holds hands and gets along, because we all know that when revolutions happen, there's all kinds of backstabbing and political intrigue.
Oh yeah, right.
And things like that. And we're not interested in making a game where like the workers and the students go, start shooting each other or something, or get into combat with each other. But we did want there to be that sort of tension that you always see amongst these various factions in these high stakes sort of situations. And the cooperative model just wasn't really doing that for us. It felt a little bit too like everyone is just too much on the same page. And then there's also this kind of often cited problem that I think both Rocket and I feel really strongly about, which is that cooperative games have this problem of quarterbacking, where one person takes over kind of the whole game. If all information is on the table and everyone's playing on the same side, then like there's one loud guy at the table and he's the one who ends up just playing for everyone else, and you just become his hands, And so when I started playing, I think Rocket introduced me to Dead of Winter. That was a game that where we saw that it's basically all cooperative gameplay, but the introduction of secret agendas and sort of hidden motives, and the fact that one person could be the traitor, and that you actually, when you look around the table, you don't actually know if you can trust everyone else. It's an interesting way of solving that quarterbacking problem, and that suddenly everyone kind of has to play for themselves, because you can't really let anyone else tell you what to do, because they could be the traitor. So that kind of brought it all together for us, and really we realized that, it should be the gameplay should be 95% cooperative, but we can create a game with that political intrigue and that sort of giving people that kind of the individual power to make their own decisions and not be quarterbacked by someone else by making it semi-cooperative. And I think this is a really fascinating realm of games that has really barely been touched on. I think we can create all kinds of semi-cooperative games, and this is just the beginning. And I don't always think that the traitor is the only way to make it semi-cooperative. And so, in general, Block by Block is sort of has a traitor mechanic to it, but it's a little bit different than that, because you can either be the nihilist or the vanguardist. And the nihilist basically neither of them want the insurrection to succeed, but they want that for very different reasons. The vanguardist wants to seize power for himself, and the nihilist wants to sort of burn everything down. And neither of those work together with everyone else who's playing the game, and this is all done through drawing cards secretly at the beginning of the game that you don't show anyone else. Everyone else is playing socially, and so the social agendas, you're basically you want to cooperate with everyone else to overthrow the state together and have a successful insurrection, but you're not sure whether other people are playing that nihilist or vanguardist role. And then to add one other level of sort of intrigue to it, there's also sectarian cards, which give you the option where you can choose whether you want to be either social and work with everyone else cooperatively, or a vanguardist and try to seize power for yourself. And those cards are sort of specifically built so that if the insurrection is going well, generally, then you can kind of decide, I'm going to play ball with everyone else and cooperate and win the game with everyone else. Or if things start to go badly, if it's not looking like it's going to work out, you can sort of take that route and just go, you know what, I'm going to screw everyone else over and take this, take power for myself. And that again is something that I think you can see, very much like parallels from reality, where it's like at certain points in some of these uprisings, when things get kind of hairy, you sometimes see people turn on each other. And again, it's not necessarily something that's nice, but if we're going to be honest about the theme, that's a core part of it. And again, I think it makes for a better game. So
I think you guys managed to tie all that in a nice package too. The rules are so concise, and I liked the fact that you could it depend on your secret objective card. You could play it how you wanted though.
Right.
Which did make for a very fun gameplay. So
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. That's great.
You guys did say this was your first project, so this is the first time that you're using the Kickstarter platform for your game. So how are you finding that so far using Kickstarter?
I mean, so far it's been awesome. I mean, I think we have the usual thing here about Kickstarter where we had a real rush of activity. It was really exciting right at the beginning. Now we're sort of entering the sort of middle part of it where things become a little bit quieter and you get more nervous, watching the speed slow down slightly. So we should talk about this again when the Kickstarter is done, and I'll tell you really what I think about it.
Sure.
Honestly, it's been awesome, and I think I'd like to think that we could do something like this without Kickstarter, but I think in a lot of ways, the ability to do these very specific and interesting games that are sort of pushing the boundaries and don't have to sort of fit into this sort of mass market game that can be everywhere. I think Kickstarter has really enabled that in a lot of ways. Crowdfunding has, and the community of people who support crowdfunding games. So, it's an exciting time to be doing this because there's a real, people really crave these kinds of innovative new projects, and that seems to be the response we've gotten so far. We've been doing this for just a little bit over a week. We're over halfway there. We definitely want to go even farther beyond our goal, because we want to hit some of those stretch goals, obviously. But yeah, it's been cool. But yeah, I'm crossing my fingers, and if anyone is interested, check out Bloc by Bloc on Kickstarter, and there's we worked with a cool documentary filmmaking group to put together a pretty awesome video that kind of lays the foundation for sort of the inspiration for the game. And so yeah, I don't know. It's been, honestly, the whole project has been amazing. It's been great.
As we record this on the 21st, you guys do have 26 days to go. So we will, of course, link the Kickstarter again in the notes for this podcast and YouTube video. So we want to make sure everybody goes and checks your game out. So what's next for you guys at Out of Order Games? You got more games in the pipeline, or?
Yeah, we have some ideas. I think, first and foremost, get this done, get it produced. We're going to be manufacturing it in the United States.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about that. We definitely, we don't want to look down on anyone else who's manufacturing games differently, but, we felt strongly that this game in particular needed to be manufactured domestically, and we want to support, industry here. Probably will be caught up with this for a good chunk of the rest, through the early part of the fall, just making sure everything gets to backers on time and stuff like that, assuming we meet our goal, crossing our fingers. But I think, we have some ideas for expansions for this game, possibly additional district tiles that could even make more city combinations. You could add in sort of different natural features like rivers and you could add in other kinds of water and islands, or just different kinds of neighborhoods, things like that, and possibly adding in the addition of other factions. So those are a few ideas that we've had, and I think we probably want to explore those for sure as expansions to Bloc by Bloc. But I think we're also both pretty excited about trying to make a much more compact game, and sort of this game is much more like 2 to 3 hours. Pretty deep strategy. I think it's in this way it's great in that it takes, the first time you play it, you're probably gonna get your butt kicked by the game, but
indeed you will.
Yes, exactly. But I think it's a game that's gonna last for a long time because it has so much replayability. There's all kinds of sort of emergent strategy that comes out of the game that we're still figuring out ourselves, as the designers, honestly. But I think we're also really interested in sort of playing with the far other end, the other end of the spectrum of games, in terms of a shorter sort of card game, something like that, maybe with a similar theme. We're not totally sure, but that's probably what we'll try next, so we can sort of sketch out the sort of the two poles of the kind of games that we can make. But either way, whatever we do, I think we're going to want to play with sort of subversive themes and themes that are a little bit more unconventional, so hopefully this helps us lay that foundation to do that in the future.
So, as I did say, your Kickstarter is still active with 26 days to go. So when are you in the hopes that it does fund on Kickstarter and it's all green lights go. When are you guys looking at the game going to be available for everybody?
It's definitely available for the holiday season, of this year. We want to get all backers. We want all backers to receive their games by November at the latest. Again, we'd love it to be earlier than that. But based on sort of the timelines that we put together with the various shipping and fulfillment companies as well as the manufacturer themselves, it's looking like November is a safe bet. So and then after that, we're hoping to have it in stores starting in right after backers get theirs first and foremost. Then it'll go on to being available. And actually, AK Press, which doesn't normally do games, they're actually a book distributor, but they will be stocking the game, and it'll be available through their website. And we're also looking at working with a few other distributors to make sure it is available for as long as possible with this printing run. But the main thing is getting that Kickstarter funded and trying to get it, get it far beyond our goal if possible. So we'll see what happens.
Well, we wish you the best of luck, and we, of course, will keep reporting on it and covering it and watching what you guys are going to do, because I think you guys are going to do some great things in the future.
Well, I really appreciate that. It's been great talking to you, and really glad to hear that you enjoyed the game. And yeah, let's definitely be in touch.
All right, thanks, Tim. Thanks for your time.
All right, cheers.